The rifle barrel didn't waver. Blood stained the snow between them. Hers or his, she couldn't tell anymore. Lila Carter's hand shook, but her feet stayed planted. For 5 years, she'd run from this moment. Now, on a godforsaken Wyoming ranch with a man she barely knew standing at her back, running was no longer an option. The ghost from her past sneered through the blizzard's dying breath, his voice cutting deeper than the frozen wind. "You think you can hide forever, murderer?" She'd built walls to survive. Today, those walls would either hold or bury her alive. Before we dive into Lila's story of survival and redemption on the brutal frontier, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this tale travels. The train's whistle tore through the morning air like a woman's scream, sharp and final. Lila Carter pressed her palm against the frost-clouded window, watching the last remnants of civilization blur into memory. The Wyoming territory stretched ahead, endless, colorless, unforgiving. It looked like the edge of the world, and perhaps that's exactly what she needed. Her fingers traced the worn handle of her canvas bag, the only thing she'd carried across 3 state lines. Inside, 2 dresses, a photograph she couldn't bear to look at but couldn't abandon, and the small revolver that had changed everything. The weight of it pressed against her conscience, even through layers of fabric. "Approaching Clearwater Station," the conductor barked, his voice rough from years of shouting over steam and iron. Clearwater. The name was a lie. There was nothing clear about what waited ahead, nothing pure about the arrangement she'd made through a single, desperate letter. Seeking work. Willing to travel. Ask nothing of my past, I'll ask nothing of yours. The response had been equally sparse. Work available. Room and board. Winter's coming. If you're soft, don't come. She wasn't soft. She'd been soft once, trusting once, and it had nearly destroyed her. That woman had died in a St. Louis boarding house, her innocence bleeding out on pine floorboards while men in suits called her a liar. This woman, the one stepping off the train into air so cold it burned her lungs, this woman was something forged in desperation's fire. The platform was nearly empty. A few weathered ranch hands loaded supplies onto wagons, their movements efficient and silent. No one looked at her directly, though she felt their glances slide past like fish beneath ice. A woman traveling alone meant one of 3 things out here: widow, whore, or trouble. The truth was somehow all 3 and none of them. "You the Carter woman?" The voice came from behind, low and rough as creek gravel. Lila turned. Cole Barrett stood like he'd been carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains behind him. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the weak winter sun. His face was all hard angles beneath the shadow of his hat, sharp jaw, prominent cheekbones, eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes swept over her once, assessing, revealing nothing. "I am." She kept her voice level, though her heart kicked against her ribs. She'd expected someone older, perhaps weathered and grandfatherly. This man couldn't be more than 35, and there was nothing paternal in the way he studied her. "That all you brought?" He nodded toward her single bag. "I travel light." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face, gone before she could be certain. "Wagon's there. We've got a 2-hour ride before dark. You good with that?" "I'm good with whatever's necessary." He turned without another word, expecting her to follow. Lila grabbed her bag and moved, boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. The wagon was weathered but sturdy, pulled by 2 massive draft horses that steamed in the cold air. Cole swung up onto the seat with practiced ease. He didn't offer her a hand. Good. She didn't want one. Lila climbed up herself, settling onto the bench with her bag clutched on her lap. Cole released the brake and clicked his tongue. The horses moved forward, and Clearwater Station, with its false promise of civilization, fell away behind them. The silence stretched. Miles of it, broken only by the wagon's creak and the horses' steady breathing. The land opened up like a wound, raw and exposed. Rolling plains gave way to rocky foothills, everything painted in shades of brown and gray. Skeletal trees clawed at the sky. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth. "You know anything about ranch work?" Cole's question came so suddenly that Lila startled. "Some. I'm a fast learner." "Out here, some gets you killed." He didn't look at her. "Chickens need tending morning and evening. Wood needs splitting and stacking. Garden needs weeding when there is one. Fence line needs checking. Meals need cooking. Laundry needs doing. You handle all that? I handle what needs handling. Winter's different here than wherever you came from. Temperature drops so fast you can watch it happen. Blizzards come up like wildfire. One minute you see clear, next you're blind and lost 10 feet from your own door. Stock freezes standing up if you're not careful. People too. I understand the risks. Do you? Now he did look at her, and the directness of his gaze felt like a physical touch. Because there's no going back once we reach the ranch. No neighbors for 15 miles. No town doctor. No telegraph. You get hurt. You get sick. You get scared. You deal with it. I'm not running you back to civilization every time things get hard. Lila met his eyes without flinching. Mr. Barrett, I didn't come out here looking for easy. I came looking for work and a place to stay. You offered both. If my work's not satisfactory, you tell me. If it is, we have an arrangement, that's all. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a loosening of the hard line of his mouth. The name's Cole. We're past formalities if we're sharing a roof. Lila, then. Lila. He tested the name, then nodded. Rules are simple. You keep to your space, I keep to mine. Cabin's got 2 rooms. You get the back one. Door stays closed. We eat in shifts unless weather says otherwise. You don't ask about my business, I don't ask about yours. You need something, you say so direct. I don't read minds and I don't play guessing games. That suits me fine. One more thing. His voice hardened. I see a lot of women come through territories like this, running from something. I don't care what you're running from. That's your truth to tell or keep. But if your past brings trouble to my door, you handle it. I built this ranch from nothing, and I won't see it burned down over someone else's ghosts. We clear? Lila's throat tightened. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then, crystal clear. Good. The silence returned, but it felt different now, weighted with understanding. Lila watched the landscape change as they climbed higher into the foothills. The air grew thinner, colder. Her fingers went numb, even tucked under her arms. There. Cole pointed ahead. At first, Lila saw nothing but wilderness. Then details emerged. A clearing carved from the pine forest. A cabin built low and solid against the wind. A barn that looked newer than the house. Corrals, fencing, and a few cattle and horses. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, suggesting someone had prepared for their arrival. But no. As they drew closer, Lila realized the smoke was old. Just the last embers of a morning fire dying out. Cole had left it burning before riding to fetch her, because he'd expected her to come. Despite offering no welcome, no warmth, he'd believed she'd step off that train. Something about that steadied her. Cole pulled the wagon up to the cabin and set the brake. Horses need tending first. You can help or you can get settled. Your choice. Lila climbed down. I'll help. His eyebrows rose a fraction. Surprise, maybe approval. Barn's there. Bring your bag inside first so nothing freezes. The cabin door wasn't locked. Lila pushed it open and stepped into dimness. Her eyes adjusted slowly. One main room, kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a single stuffed armchair near the fireplace. Everything was clean but worn, functional without decoration. No curtains, no rugs, nothing soft. 2 doors led off the main room. One stood open, revealing Cole's space. A narrow bed, a trunk, clothing hung on pegs. The other was closed. Lila crossed to it, heart suddenly pounding. This would be hers, her space, her door to close. She turned the handle. The room was small but not cramped. A bed with a plain quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a window facing east. She'd wake with the sun. Someone had left a kerosene lamp on the dresser and kindling beside a small heating stove in the corner. Lila set her bag on the bed and stood there, breathing. The silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. No city noise, no voices through thin walls, no footsteps in hallways making her freeze with fear. Just silence, just space, just a door she could close. She closed it now, testing. The latch caught firmly. From inside, she could slide a bolt, simple but effective. Cole had given her a room with a lock. That meant something. When she emerged, Cole was already outside. She found him in the barn, hefting saddles off the draft horses with economical movements. He'd removed his coat despite the cold, working in just a wool shirt that stretched across his shoulders. Brushes there. He nodded toward the wall without looking at her. Work from neck down, firm strokes. They're gentle, but they're big. Stay aware of their feet. Lila grabbed a brush and approached the nearest horse, a massive bay mare with kind eyes. What's her name? Mabel. Hello, Mabel. Lila ran her hand down the mare's neck, feeling the heat of her, the solid reality of muscle and bone. The horse blew out a breath and leaned into her touch. She likes you. Cole's voice held a note of surprise. She's particular about people. Animals are better judges of character than most humans. That's a fact. They worked in silence, but it was a different silence than the wagon ride. This one felt almost comfortable. The barn was warmer than outside, heated by the horses' bodies and insulated by hay. The rhythmic sound of brushing became almost meditative. You have horses before? Cole asked eventually. My father kept two. I helped care for them before... She stopped. Before everything fell apart. Before the trial. Before she became someone who couldn't finish sentences about her past. Cole didn't push. He just nodded and moved to the next horse. When the animals were settled and fed, they returned to the cabin. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and Lila's breath clouded white. Cole went immediately to the fireplace, building up the fire with practiced efficiency. You cook? He asked, straightening. Yes. Good. Pantry's there, cellar doors outside on the east side. You'll find potatoes, carrots, preserved meat. Make what you can. I'll be checking the fence line before dark. He grabbed his coat and was gone before she could respond. Lila stood alone in the cabin, listening to his boots crunch away into silence. Then she moved. Pantry first, flour, salt, dried beans, coffee, sugar, a few tins of vegetables. Cellar next. She pulled on her coat and found the door, descending into cold darkness. Her eyes adjusted to reveal shelves lined with jars. Someone had put up vegetables before Cole became so solitary. The jars were dusty, but the seals looked good. She grabbed potatoes, carrots, onions, and a jar labeled beef stew meat. Back inside, she lit the stove and got to work. Cooking focused her mind, gave her hands purpose. She peeled and chopped, browned the meat, built a stew that would stick to their ribs in this cold. The cabin filled with the smell of it, warm and savory. She made biscuits too, mixing dough with the efficiency born of necessity. By the time Cole returned, night had fallen, complete and absolute. No city lights here, just darkness pressed against the windows like something living. He stamped snow off his boots and hung his coat, then stopped. His nose lifted slightly, catching the scent of food. "Smells good," he said, and something in his voice suggested he hadn't said those words in a long time. "Should be ready. I'll dish up." "We can eat together tonight. Storm's coming. I can feel it. You need to know the winter protocols before it hits." They sat at the small table, close enough that Lila could feel the heat radiating off him. He ate methodically, cleaning his plate without comment. She picked at her own food, stomach too tight to manage much. "You need to eat," Cole said without looking up. "Weather out here burns calories like fire. You don't fuel up, you'll freeze." Lila forced down another bite, then another. He was right. The cold had already sapped her energy in ways she hadn't expected. When the plates were clean, Cole pushed back slightly. "Winter protocols. Listen close because I'll only say this once. When a storm's coming, we secure everything. Animals get extra feed and water because we might not reach them for days. Wood gets stacked inside. If we can't get to the woodpile, we're in trouble. Food gets pulled from the cellar in case the door freezes shut. All shutters get latched from inside. We string a rope from cabin to barn. If you have to go out during a whiteout, you clip on and follow the rope. You don't. You die 10 feet from the door, and we don't find you until spring." Lila swallowed hard. "Understood." "Blizzards can last 3 days, sometimes more. We'll be stuck inside together. You keep to your room if you need space, but meals we share. It's warmer that way, and we conserve fuel. You feel any part of you go numb, fingers, toes, nose, ears. You tell me immediately. Frostbite sets in fast, and once it starts, it doesn't stop." "I will." His eyes met hers, searching. "You scared?" "Yes." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. "But I've been scared before. I'm still here. Something passed across his face, understanding, maybe respect. Fear's not weakness out here, it's smart. You'll do fine. He stood, gathering the dishes. Lila moved to help, but he waved her off. You cooked, I clean. That's fair division. She watched him work, watched the way he moved through the space with the confidence of someone who'd lived alone too long, who'd forgotten how to account for another person's presence. But he was trying. In his own rough way, he was trying. I'll turn in, Lila said. Early start tomorrow? Sunup. Chickens won't wait. She nodded and retreated to her room, closing the door behind her. The bolt slid home with a soft click. She stood there, forehead pressed to the wood, breathing. Day 1. She'd survived day 1. Lila changed into her nightgown, the fabric freezing against her skin. She lit the small stove in the corner. Cole had left matches on the dresser, another small consideration. The heat built slowly, taking the edge off the cold. She climbed into bed fully dressed except for her boots, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Through the thin wall, she could hear Cole moving around the main room. The clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair. Then, nothing. The silence felt alive, full of all the words neither of them would speak. Lila closed her eyes and tried not to remember other rooms, other silences, other nights when she'd lain awake listening for footsteps that would mean danger. This was different. Cole had given her a door with a lock. He'd established boundaries. He'd asked nothing of her but work. She could do this. She had to do this. There was nowhere left to run. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier night. Wind howling around the cabin's corners, the crack and settle of wood contracting in the cold. Once, a sound that might have been a wolf, distant and mournful. When she finally sank into deeper sleep, she dreamed of St. Louis, of blood on pine floors, of a man's face going slack with surprise as the revolver kicked in her hand, of running, always running, while voices shouted murderer behind her. She woke to darkness and cold, her heart hammering. The room was unfamiliar for a terrifying moment before memory returned. Wyoming, the ranch, Cole Barrett. Safe. For now, at least, she was safe. Well, the days fell into rhythm. Wake before dawn. Tend the chickens while Cole handled the larger stock. Breakfast at separate times, clean, men, cook, split wood. She learned the layout of the ranch, the patterns of the work, the weight of the axe in her hands. Her body ached in new ways, muscles screaming from labor she'd never done before. But she didn't complain. Cole didn't either. He simply worked, relentless and silent, barely acknowledging her presence beyond practical necessities. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her, when she hefted water buckets or split kindling or mucked out stalls, and she couldn't read his expression. Surprise? Approval? Suspicion? All three, maybe. They existed in parallel, two people sharing space but not lives. It should have been enough. It was the arrangement she'd wanted. But on the 5th day, the sky changed. Lila noticed it at mid-morning while hanging laundry that would freeze dry in the brutal cold. The clouds came rolling in from the north, not white, but an ominous gray-green that made her stomach clench. Cole appeared at her elbow so suddenly she gasped. Inside, now! The laundry! Leave it! Storm's coming fast! His urgency was infectious. Lila dropped the clothespins and ran for the cabin. Cole was already moving, his actions deliberate and swift. He disappeared into the cellar and emerged with his arms full of supplies. Then to the woodpile, stacking logs inside, until the cabin's corner was piled high. He strung the safety rope from door to barn with movements so practiced they looked like a dance. What do you need me to do? Lila asked. Fill every container with water, pots, buckets, anything that holds liquid. When the storm hits, the pump might freeze. She moved. Filled the big cooking pot, the water buckets, the basin. Her arms burned, but she didn't stop. Cole worked around her, boarding up windows, double-checking the shutters, bringing in more wood. How long? She asked. 2 days? Maybe 3? He glanced at the sky. It's a bad one. I can feel it. The first snowflakes fell an hour later, fat and heavy, falling so fast they obscured the barn within minutes. The wind picked up, howling like something alive and hungry. Cole finished securing the last shutter and slammed the door behind him, dropping the heavy bar into place. They were sealed in. The temperature inside the cabin dropped immediately. Without windows to let in any sun, the space felt like a cave. Cole built up the fire until it roared, then checked the stove. "We conserve fuel but stay warm," he said. "Cold kills faster than hunger out here." Lila nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Already she could feel the chill creeping through the walls, finding every crack and gap. The first day wasn't terrible. They ate together. There was no point pretending at separate meals when the cold demanded they stay near the fire. Cole was silent as always, but his presence felt less intrusive now. Just another fact of survival, like the fire or the food. But the storm didn't ease. If anything, it intensified. The wind screamed around the cabin, a sound like tortured voices. Snow piled against the door. Lila could hear it building, feel the pressure of it. The world beyond the walls ceased to exist. There was only this small space, this weak firelight, this brutal cold pressing in. The second day, Lila woke feeling wrong. Her throat ached, her head pounded. She forced herself up, forced herself to move through the morning routine, but her hands shook and her vision swam. "You sick?" Cole's question was flat, but his eyes were sharp. "I'm fine." "Don't lie. Not about this." "I said I'm fine." She heard the snap in her voice and regretted it, but she wouldn't show weakness. Not now. Cole studied her for a long moment, then nodded. But she caught him watching her throughout the day, his gaze tracking her movements. By evening, she couldn't hide it anymore. Fever burned through her, turning her skin to fire and her thoughts to fog. She tried to stand to help with dinner, and her legs gave out. Cole caught her before she hit the floor, his hands iron hard on her arms. "Lila," his voice cut through the fever haze. "Can you walk?" Yes, I can." But she couldn't. The room spun violently. Cole didn't ask again. He simply lifted her, effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to her room. He set her on the bed with surprising gentleness. "Stay there." An order, not a suggestion. He disappeared. Lila tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. The fever had its claws in deep now, dragging her down into confusion. She was back in St. Louis. Back in that boarding house. Back in the moment when everything shattered. "You're lying!" The constable's face red with anger. "Women don't defend themselves with bullets. You murdered him, and you'll hang for it." Blood on her hands. So much blood. She'd never seen that much blood. "Please," she whispered. "Please, he was going to... He said he'd..." "What a man says in his own room is his business. What you did is murder." "Lila." The voice pulled her back. Cole stood over her, his face a mask of concern barely visible through the fever fog. He held a basin of water and several cloths. "This is going to be cold," he said, "but the fever's too high. I have to bring it down." She tried to speak, but only a whimper came out. Her teeth chattered despite the fire in her blood. Cole sat on the edge of the bed. He wrung out a cloth and pressed it to her forehead. The cold was shocking, almost painful. Lila flinched. "I know, I'm sorry." His voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "But you'll cook from the inside out if I don't do this." He worked methodically, cloth to forehead, to cheeks, the back of her neck. When she tried to pull away, he caught her hands, not roughly, but firmly. "Don't fight me on this, please." "Please." The word sounded foreign in his mouth. Lila stopped struggling. Let him work. Let the cold claws do their job. Slowly, incrementally, the fever's edge dulled. Her thoughts cleared enough to realize what was happening. Cole Barrett, a man who'd promised distance and boundaries, was caring for her with steady, patient hands. "Why?" The word came out as a croak. "Why what?" "Why help me? The arrangement... You said..." "I said a lot of things." He wrung out another cloth. "But I don't let people die under my roof. That's not who I am." "You don't know me." "Don't need to know you to know you're worth keeping alive." Something in those words cracked something inside her. Lila felt tears slip down her temples, hot against her cold skin. She turned her face away, ashamed. "Hey." Cole's hand touched her chin so gentle it was barely there. "No shame in being sick. No shame in needing help. There's shame in everything I've done." The words came out before she could stop them, fever stripping away her defenses. "I killed a man. They wanted to hang me for it. They said I was a murderer, but they didn't. They wouldn't hear what he..." "Stop." Cole's voice was firm but not harsh. "You're fevered. You don't have to tell me anything. But you should know. You should know what I'm doing is keeping you alive. The rest is your story to tell when you're well and ready, not before. Lila stared at him, this hard man with gentle hands, and couldn't understand him. Couldn't understand why he wasn't recoiling, wasn't demanding answers, wasn't already planning to send her away. Sleep now, Cole said. I'll check on you through the night. The storm, still raging. We're not going anywhere. Sleep. She did, falling into darkness that swallowed her whole. When Lila woke, weak sunlight filtered through gaps in the shutters. The storm's roar had diminished to a whisper. Her fever had broken. She was damp with sweat, weak as a newborn, but clear-headed. Cole sat in the chair he'd pulled to her bedside. His head was tipped back, eyes closed, but he wasn't quite asleep, keeping watch, even exhausted. Cole? Her voice was barely a whisper. His eyes opened immediately. He sat forward, studying her face. Fever broke. How long? 2 days. He scrubbed a hand over his face. You were bad. Talked a lot. Most of it didn't make sense. Lila's heart clenched. What did I say? Names? Places? St. Louis came up a lot. You said self-defense more times than I could count. He met her eyes. You also said he wouldn't stop. Shame flooded through her. She tried to sit up, but Cole stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. Rest. You're not strong enough yet. You must think... I think you survived something that would have broken most people. I think you came out here because you had no other choice. And I think whatever happened in St. Louis, you're still here, still fighting, still breathing. That counts for something. Lila's throat tightened. The law doesn't see it that way. The law's not always right. Those simple words spoken with such certainty undid her. Tears came again, and this time she didn't fight them. Cole didn't look away. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just sat there, a solid presence in the wreckage of her defenses. When the tears finally stopped, Lila wiped her face with shaking hands. I'm sorry. I'm not usually... Fever strips people down to their truth. Nothing to apologize for. Still, the arrangement we had, the arrangement stands. But maybe we add one thing to it. What? Honesty when it matters. I won't ask your full story unless you choose to tell it. But if danger's coming, if your past is riding this direction, you tell me. Give me a chance to prepare instead of being blindsided. That fair? Lila nodded slowly. Fair. Good. Now eat. He produced a bowl of broth from somewhere. Slow sips, work up to solid food. She managed half the bowl before exhaustion pulled her under again. But this sleep was different, peaceful, unmarred by nightmares. When she woke again, evening had come. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling. She could hear Cole moving around in the main room, the familiar sounds of cooking. Lila sat up carefully. Her legs trembled, but held. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and made her way to the door, opened it. Cole looked up from the stove. You should be resting. I've rested enough. What are you making? Stew, nothing fancy. Smells good. They looked at each other across the small space. Something had shifted between them during the storm, during those fevered confessions and gentle hands. The distance they'd carefully maintained had narrowed without either of them meaning it to. Thank you, Lila said, for taking care of me. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did. Cole's voice was gruff. Like I said, I don't let people die under my roof. Still, thank you. He nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. Storm's passed. Roads will be hell for a week, but the worst is over. You rest up a few more days, then we get back to work. I can work tomorrow. You can rest tomorrow. That's an order, not a suggestion. Lila almost smiled. Yes, sir. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Go on back to bed. I'll bring you dinner when it's ready. She returned to her room, but this time she left the door open. It felt right somehow, a small gesture of trust returned for trust given. As she settled back under the quilts, Lila heard Cole moving around, heard the clink of bowls and spoons. Outside, the wind had finally died. The world was silent and white and new, and for the first time since St. Louis, Lila thought maybe, just maybe, She could stop running long enough to breathe. Spring came slowly to the Wyoming territory, as if winter refused to release its grip without a fight. The snow receded inch by stubborn inch, revealing dead grass and frozen earth beneath. But with the thaw came something else, a shift in the air between Lila and Cole that neither of them acknowledged, but both felt in the spaces where silence used to be. Lila had regained her strength over the weeks following the fever, throwing herself into work with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if labor could scrub away the vulnerability she'd shown during those fevered confessions, as if enough sweat and sore muscles could rebuild the walls Cole's gentle hands had dismantled. But the walls wouldn't hold. Not anymore. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, not with suspicion, but with something that looked almost like understanding, and she found herself watching back, noticing things she'd trained herself not to see. The way he moved through the world with quiet competence, the rare half-smile that softened his harsh features when Mabel nuzzled his shoulder. The careful way he set her coffee down each morning, never meeting her eyes but always remembering she took it black. They still kept their distance, still ate meals mostly in silence, still retreated to separate rooms when the day's work was done. But the silence had changed. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was a held breath, waiting. One morning in early March, Lila woke to a sound she hadn't heard in months. Birdsong. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find the world transformed. Patches of green pushed through the snow, water dripped from the cabin's eaves in a steady rhythm. The air smelled different, wet earth and pine, and something alive underneath it all. Cole was already at the fence line, repairing winter damage. His coat lay discarded on a post, and he worked in just his shirt despite the lingering cold. Lila watched him for a moment before heading to the chicken coop. The hens were restless with spring energy, clucking and flapping as she scattered feed. "You're up early." She turned to find Cole leaning against the coop fence, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. Dirt smudged his forearm where he'd been digging post holes. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The quiet's too loud sometimes." His expression shifted, recognition of something familiar. "Yeah, I know that feeling." They stood there in the strengthening light, neither quite sure what to say. The old rules of their arrangement seemed inadequate now, too rigid for whatever this was becoming. "I'm heading into town tomorrow," Cole said finally. "Need supplies before the spring planting. You should come." Lila's heart kicked against her ribs. Town meant people. People meant questions. Questions meant risk. "I don't think—" "You can't hide here forever, Lila." His voice was gentle, but firm. "And you shouldn't have to. Clearwater's not St. Louis. Folks mind their business out here. You're just another ranch hand as far as anyone knows." "What if someone recognizes me? What if there are wanted posters?" "Then we deal with it. But hiding only works until it doesn't. Better to know what we're facing than jump at shadows." The logic was sound, but logic couldn't touch the fear coiled in her chest like barbed wire. Still, he was right. She couldn't live like a ghost forever. "All right," she said. "I'll come." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Good. We leave at first light." The next morning arrived cold and clear. Lila dressed in her plainest clothes, tucking her hair under a wool cap. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Windburned, work-hardened, eyes that had learned to scan horizons for danger. The ride to Clearwater took 3 hours over roads still muddy with snowmelt. Cole kept the horses to a steady pace, navigating ruts and washouts with practiced ease. They passed 2 other ranches on the way, distant buildings that looked small and vulnerable against the vast landscape. Cole raised a hand to a man working a field, received a wave in return, but didn't stop. "That's Henry Walsh," he said. "Good neighbor, doesn't talk much." "Sounds like someone else I know." The corner of Cole's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Clearwater appeared on the horizon like a collection of children's blocks scattered on a table. Main Street ran straight through the center, false-fronted buildings trying to look bigger than they were. General store, saloon, bank, telegraph office, a few other establishments Lila couldn't identify from this distance. Her hands tightened on the wagon seat. Cole noticed. "Stay close to me," he said. "You're my hired hand. Anyone asks, you came from Kansas, family farm failed, needed work." Simple story, easy to remember. "Kansas," Lila repeated. "Family farm failed." "That's it. And Lila—" He looked at her directly. "Breathe. You look like you're headed for the gallows. She tried to relax her shoulders, loosen her grip, failed at both. Cole pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and set the brake. A few people moved along the boardwalks, more than Lila expected for such a small town. Ranchers likely, stocking up now that the roads were passable again. Mr. Barrett! A round-faced man emerged from the store, wiping his hands on an apron. Good to see you made it through winter. Mr. Hendricks. Cole climbed down, then offered Lila a hand. She took it, grateful for the steadying contact. Need the usual supplies, plus extra for spring planting. Hendricks' eyes slid to Lila with open curiosity. And who might this be? Hired hand, Lila Carter, came up from Kansas last fall. Kansas? Hard times down there, I hear. Drought, locusts, all manner of troubles. Hendricks extended a hand. Welcome to Clearwater, Miss Carter. Any friend of Mr. Barrett's is welcome here. Lila shook his hand, forcing a smile. Thank you, sir. Come on in, come on in. I'll get your list together, Cole. Miss Carter, feel free to look around. We just got a shipment of yard goods, some real pretty calico if you're inclined. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and leather and lamp oil. Shelves lined every wall, packed with everything from canned goods to saddles. Two women browsed the fabric section, speaking in low voices. They looked up when Lila entered, their eyes sharp with assessment. Morning, ladies, Cole said with a nod. Cole Barrett, as I live and breathe. The older woman approached, a smile stretching her thin face. Thought winter might have finally claimed you out there all alone. Not yet, Mrs. Patterson. And who's this? Her gaze fixed on Lila like a hawk spotting prey. Here it comes, Lila thought. The questions, the scrutiny, the moment someone remembers a newspaper story about a murderess fleeing St. Louis. Lila Carter, Cole said before she could speak, hired her last fall to help with the ranch work. Hired help? Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows climbed. My, must be doing well for yourself. Well enough. Cole's tone made it clear the topic was closed. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't deterred. She circled Lila like she was inspecting livestock. You look familiar, dear. Have we met before? Lila's throat went dry. I don't think so, ma'am. I'm from Kansas. Kansas? No, that's not it. You remind me of someone. Can't quite place it. She tapped her chin, thinking. Cole stepped between them with the casual ease of someone moving around furniture. Mrs. Patterson, I believe your husband was looking for you. Saw him headed toward the telegraph office. Oh, yes, we're expecting word about our daughter. She patted Lila's arm. Welcome to Clearwater, dear. I'm sure I'll remember where I know you from. She bustled off, leaving Lila frozen in place. Cole's hand touched the small of her back. Brief, grounding. Breathe, he murmured. She doesn't know you. She just likes to think she knows everyone. She said I looked familiar. You've got a common face. That's not an insult. It's a blessing out here. Nobody really sees you. They just see what they expect to see. Lila wanted to believe him, but the fear had teeth now, gnawing at her composure. She forced herself to move through the store, picking up small items she didn't need, trying to look normal. Trying to be normal. The younger woman from the fabric section approached. She was pretty in a fragile way with blonde curls and pale blue eyes that held a sharpness her delicate appearance belied. You're new, she said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. Working for Cole Barrett. That must be interesting. Something in her tone suggested layers Lila couldn't read. It's work. Honest work. Of course. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm Sarah Walsh. My father's ranch borders Cole's to the south. The name clicked. Henry Walsh, the man Cole had waved to on the road. Pleased to meet you. Are you, though? Sarah tilted her head. Most women wouldn't find pleasure in working a ranch in the middle of nowhere, doing a man's labor for a man who barely speaks. I'm not most women. No, Sarah agreed. I don't suppose you are. Before Lila could decipher that comment, Cole appeared at her elbow. Got everything we need. Time to go. Sarah's eyes flickered between them. So soon? I was hoping to get to know Miss Carter better. Another time, perhaps. Cole's hand found Lila's elbow, steering her toward the door. Mrs. Walsh. Miss Walsh, Sarah corrected sweetly. I'm not married, Mr. Barrett, as you well know. They loaded the supplies in tense silence. Lila could feel Sarah watching from the store window, feel Mrs. Patterson's curious gaze from across the street, feel the weight of the whole town's attention settling on her shoulders like snow before an avalanche. "That went well," Cole said dryly once they were clear of town. "That woman, Sarah, she seemed interested in things that aren't her business. Sarah's been trying to catch my attention since her father bought the neighboring ranch 5 years ago. She sees you as competition." "Competition for what? I'm just hired help." Cole was quiet for a long moment, then, "Maybe to her, not to me." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lila didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing. But something in her chest loosened, warm and dangerous. They were halfway home when Cole suddenly pulled the horses to a stop. His whole body had gone still, alert. Lila followed his gaze to the road ahead. A single rider approached at an easy lope. Male, well-dressed for the territory, riding a horse too fine for ranch work. As he drew closer, Lila could make out more details. Dark suit, polished boots, a face that looked like it had been carved from pale stone. "You know him?" Cole's voice was low, careful. "No. Should I? He's not from around here, and men in suits this far out usually mean trouble." The rider raised a hand in greeting. Cole returned it cautiously. They waited as the stranger closed the distance, Lila's heart hammering against her ribs. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 30, with sharp features and eyes the color of winter ice. When he smiled, it didn't warm his face. "Afternoon," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Beautiful day for a ride." "It is," Cole agreed neutrally. The stranger's gaze slid to Lila, lingered. "I'm looking for someone. Thought perhaps you folks might help me. Depends on who you're looking for and why." "A woman. She'd be mid-20s, dark hair, traveling alone. Might be using a different name." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "She's wanted for murder back in St. Louis. There's a reward." Lila's blood turned to ice. Cole didn't move, didn't react, but she felt the shift in him, the coiling of tension like a snake preparing to strike. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Cole said. "But we're pretty isolated out here. Don't see many travelers." The stranger studied them both with those cold eyes. "You sure about that? Because I heard in town that you hired someone last fall. A woman named Lila Carter from Kansas." The name hung in the air like smoke. Lila couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could see was the wanted poster in his hand, her own face staring back at her from across time and miles. "That's right," Cole said calmly. "Hired help from Kansas. Family farm failed. She needed work. What about it?" "I'd like to speak with her, just to confirm she's not the woman I'm looking for." "She's not." "You seem very certain of that, Mr. Barrett. Cole Barrett. And I'm certain because the woman I hired doesn't match your description. She's older, heavier, hair's more brown than dark. And she's been working my ranch for 6 months. If she murdered someone in St. Louis, she'd have to have been in 2 places at once." The lie came so smoothly, Lila almost believed it herself. The stranger's eyes narrowed. 6 months, you say?" "That's right. Came up in September, just before the first snow. The murder happened in October." "Then your timing's off." Cole's voice hardened. "Or your information is. Either way, you're wasting your time here." The stranger's hand moved to his jacket, not threatening but deliberate. Lila's fingers inched toward the revolver hidden under her coat, but he only pulled out a card, extending it to Cole. "Thomas Everett, private investigator. If you do happen to see anyone matching this description, there's good money in it. $500. Cole took the card without looking at it. "I'll keep that in mind." Everett's gaze returned to Lila one last time, lingering on her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Then he smiled that empty smile again. "Pleasure meeting you both. And Miss Carter," Lila managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Lila Carter." "Miss Carter, enjoy the rest of your day." He wheeled his horse and rode back toward town at the same easy lope, as if he had all the time in the world, as if he knew exactly what he'd found. Cole waited until Everett was out of sight before releasing the brake. The horses moved forward, but he kept them at a walk. "Cole, not here. Wait until we're home." The rest of the ride passed in suffocating silence. Lila's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Everett had a wanted poster. He knew about the murder. He knew she'd been traveling alone. The only thing standing between her and a noose was Cole's quick thinking and smooth lies. 6 months. He'd said she'd been here 6 months, giving her an alibi for October. Why? Why would he lie for her? Risk himself for a woman he barely knew? Back at the ranch, Cole unhitched the horses with mechanical efficiency. Lila moved to help, but he waved her off. Inside. We need to talk. She waited in the cabin, pacing, unable to sit still. When Cole finally entered, his face was grim. Tell me everything, he said. No more fragments. I need the whole story if I'm going to help you. You don't have to help me. You shouldn't. If they catch you lying, Lila. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Tell me. Now. So she did. The words tumbled out in a rush. The boarding house in St. Louis where she'd worked as a seamstress. The wealthy client who'd taken an interest in her. The promises he'd made. The night he'd cornered her in her room, drunk and insistent. The way his promises had turned to threats when she refused him. He said no one would believe me, Lila whispered. Said I was just a poor seamstress, and he was a respected businessman. Said he'd have me fired, evicted, arrested if I told anyone what he tried to do. I pushed him away. He came at me again. I grabbed the sewing scissors from my table just to scare him, I swear, just to make him back off. But he didn't back off. No, he lunged. I moved. The scissors... She looked down at her hands, seeing blood that wasn't there. They went into his throat. He just stood there, surprised, like he couldn't believe I'd actually defend myself. Then he fell. Cole's grip on her shoulders tightened. And then? I ran. I knew no one would believe me. A poor woman kills a rich man in her room? They'd call it murder. They'd say I lured him there. So I took what I could carry, and I ran. Made it to the train station, bought a ticket west. I've been running ever since. Until you came here. Until I came here. Lila's voice broke. I thought I could finally stop. Thought I was far enough, anonymous enough, but he found me anyway. He suspects. He doesn't know. He saw my face, Cole. He looked right at me. And I told him, you're not the woman he's looking for. I gave you an alibi. A false alibi. If anyone checks, who's going to check? You think Clearwater keeps detailed records of when every ranch hand gets hired? Most of that happens on handshakes in good faith. Cole released her shoulders, started pacing. Here's what we do. You stay away from town. Anytime someone comes to the ranch, you're working in the back 40 or checking the north fence line. Out of sight. We give Everett nothing to work with. He's not going to just give up. Maybe not. But winter hits hard out here. Most investigators from back east don't last a month once the real cold sets in. If we can hold out until next winter, make it through spring and summer keeping you hidden, he'll likely move on to easier prey. That's a year of hiding, a year of you lying for me, risking yourself. Cole stopped pacing, turned to face her. Yeah, it is. Why would you do that? The question hung between them. Cole's jaw worked, like he was chewing on words too hard to swallow. Because I know what it's like, he finally said, to have one bad moment define your whole life, to be judged for defending yourself, to run until you can't run anymore. What happened to you? He shook his head. Another time. Right now, we focus on keeping you safe. Cole? Another time, Lila. She nodded, recognizing the wall he'd just erected. Fair enough. She'd kept her secrets. He deserved to keep his. What do we do now? Now? We unload the supplies, feed the animals, make dinner, live like normal because normal is all we've got. But normal felt impossible with Thomas Everett's cold eyes haunting her memory. Lila moved through the evening chores in a daze, jumping at every sound, seeing threats in every shadow. Cole worked beside her, solid and steady, but even his presence couldn't fully quiet the panic clawing at her throat. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like voices calling her name. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting her breaths until they blurred together. A knock on her door made her bolt upright, hand reaching for the revolver under her pillow. It's me, Cole's voice came through the wood. You awake? Yes? Can I come in? She hesitated, then, yes. He entered carrying a kerosene lamp, its light casting shadows across his face. He'd changed into sleep clothes, worn trousers and a simple shirt, and his hair was disheveled from running his hands through it. Can't sleep either, he said, setting the lamp on the dresser. Kept thinking about what happens if he comes back. He will come back. I know. Cole sat on the edge of her bed, careful to keep distance between them. So we prepare. Tomorrow I teach you to shoot properly, not just pointing and hoping, but real marksmanship. You need to be able to defend yourself if it comes to that. I already know how to shoot. You know how to pull a trigger in panic. That's different. His eyes found hers in the lamplight. I also teach you the land. Every hiding place, every escape route, every way to disappear if you need to. You won't be trapped again, Lila. I promise you that. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. Why are you doing this? I told you. No, the real reason. Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been old pain. 5 years ago, I had a wife. Sarah wasn't lying when she said I live alone now. I do, but I didn't always. He stared at his hands. Her name was Emma. She was soft where I'm hard, gentle where I'm rough, balanced me out. We were happy, or I thought we were. Lila waited, barely breathing. Winter came early that year, brutal. We were snowed in for weeks. When the thaw finally came, a man rode up. Said he was Emma's husband from back east. Said she'd run out on him, stolen money, and he wanted her back. But she was your wife. In common law, yeah, but not on paper. She'd never told me about him, never mentioned having a life before Wyoming. I didn't know what to believe. His voice cracked. I should have believed her. Should have seen the fear in her eyes, heard what she was trying to tell me. But I hesitated, asked too many questions. And in that moment of doubt, she ran, took a horse, and rode out into the wilderness alone. Cole, they found her body a week later. Horse had thrown her. She'd broken her leg, couldn't walk, froze to death in a ravine. He looked up, and his eyes were haunted. She ran because she thought I wouldn't protect her. And she was right, I didn't. I let doubt get in the way. I let her run alone. Lila's heart ached for him, for the wife who'd died alone, for the guilt he'd been carrying ever since. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I'm the one who hesitated. I'm the one who let her see doubt in my face. He met her gaze. I won't make that mistake again. You're telling me you defended yourself, that you had no choice. I believe you. No hesitation, no doubt. And I will protect you, Lila. Whatever it takes. She reached out before she could stop herself, her hand covering his. His skin was warm, calloused, real. Thank you, she whispered. Cole's hand turned beneath hers, fingers curling to hold on. You don't have to thank me for doing what's right. They sat like that, hands joined, the lamplight flickering between them. The walls they'd built around themselves had cracks now, letting through something neither of them had expected to find: connection, understanding, the tentative beginning of trust. Finally, Cole stood. Try to sleep. We've got hard work ahead. Cole? She stopped him at the door. Your wife, Emma, she was lucky to have you, even if she didn't know it at the end. His jaw tightened, then he nodded and left, taking the lamp with him. But the darkness didn't feel as heavy now. Lila lay back down, Cole's promise echoing in her mind. I will protect you, whatever it takes. For the first time since seeing Thomas Everett on that road, she allowed herself to believe it might be true. Morning came too soon and too bright. Lila found Cole already outside, setting up targets on the far end of the property. He'd laid out several rifles and revolvers on a blanket, cleaning cloths and ammunition boxes arranged with military precision. Breakfast first, he called when he saw her. Then we work. They ate quickly, fried eggs and day-old bread, and drank strong coffee that chased away the last cobwebs of sleep. Then Cole led her to the makeshift shooting range, his teaching mode firmly in place. First rule, respect the weapon. It's not a toy, not a threat, just a tool. The moment you start thinking of it as anything else, you make mistakes. He picked up a revolver, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. Second rule, know your weapon, how it loads, how it fires, how it feels in your hand. You carried a revolver that night in St. Louis? Yes, small one. I don't even know what kind. Probably a Derringer or pocket pistol. Good for close range, terrible for anything else. He handed her a larger revolver. This is a Colt .45, standard out here. Heavy, reliable, accurate if you know what you're doing. Feel the weight. Lila took it, surprised by how solid it felt. Not like the panic light weapon she'd grabbed in desperation, but something with purpose. Cole spent the next hour teaching her stance, grip, sight alignment. His hands corrected her posture, impersonal but firm, adjusting her shoulders, her elbows, the angle of her head. He stood behind her, arms bracketing hers, showing her how to absorb the recoil. Don't close your eyes when you shoot. Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze smooth and steady, like you're trying not to break an egg. His voice was close to her ear, patient. Breathe out, squeeze, let the shot surprise you. She tried. Missed the target completely. Tried again. Hit the dirt 3 feet to the left. Better. You're anticipating the kick. Relax into it. Shot after shot, correction after correction. Her arms ached. Her ears rang despite the cloth plugs Cole had given her. But slowly, incrementally, the bullets started finding their marks. By midday, she could hit the target more often than not. By evening, she could group her shots close enough to kill a man, if it came to that. Good, Cole said, nodding approval. Tomorrow we work on moving targets. Day after, shooting under stress. By the time Everett comes back, if he comes back, you'll be ready. They cleaned the weapons together in the fading light, the ritual almost meditative. Lila watched Cole's hands work, efficient and sure, and felt something shift in her chest. This man who'd promised distance had given her everything: protection, training, belief. He'd stepped into the gap where the law had failed her, where society had abandoned her. Why didn't you ever remarry? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cole's hands stilled on the rifle he was cleaning. Didn't seem fair. To hold someone else up against Emma's ghost. That's not living. That's just existing. Yeah, well, existing's safer. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. Or it was, until you showed up. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't look away. I'm sorry I complicated your life. I'm not. 2 words. Simple. Devastating. They finished cleaning in charged silence, the air between them crackling with something neither dared name. When the weapons were put away and the tools stored, Cole walked her back to the cabin. At the door, he stopped. Lila. Don't. She turned to face him. Don't say something we can't take back. What if I want to? Then wait. Wait until this is over, until we know we're safe. Wait until we're not just 2 people clinging to each other out of necessity. Her voice dropped. Wait until we're sure. Cole's hand came up, almost touching her face, then falling away. All right, I'll wait. He stepped back, putting distance between them again. But the distance felt different now. Not a wall, but a promise. Something held in reserve for a better time. Lila went inside, closed her door, slid the bolt home. But for the first time, the lock didn't feel like protection. It felt like a barrier between her and something she was starting to want. 3 weeks passed in tense anticipation, each day stretching longer than the last. Spring bloomed across the Wyoming territory with almost aggressive beauty, wildflowers pushing through the thawed earth, aspens leafing out in brilliant green, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. The land transformed from death to life, while Lila waited for Thomas Everett to return and destroy everything she'd begun to build. But he didn't come. Days turned to weeks with no sign of the investigator. No riders approaching the ranch, no news from town. Cole made the supply runs alone now, leaving Lila to manage the ranch in his absence. Each time he returned, she searched his face for bad news and found only the same grim determination. Nothing, he'd say. No sign of him. Hendricks says a man matching his description left town 2 weeks ago, headed south. He's not gone, Lila would reply. He's just waiting. Maybe. Or maybe he believed me and moved on. But neither of them truly believed that. The training continued. Cole pushed her harder each day, shooting from horseback, reloading under pressure, hitting targets while running. He taught her to read the land like a map, showing her every canyon and creek bed, every stand of trees thick enough to hide in, every game trail that could serve as an escape route. If something happens and we get separated, he said one afternoon while they stood on a ridge overlooking the ranch, you go north to the Walker Creek crossing. Follow the water upstream for 3 miles. There's a line shack I built years ago, small, hidden in the pines. Stock it with supplies. If I'm not there within 2 days, you keep moving. Head for the Montana border. I'm not leaving you behind. Cole's jaw tightened. If it comes to that, you won't have a choice. Promise me, Lila. Promise you'll save yourself. She wanted to argue, to tell him she was done running, that she'd stand and fight whatever came. But the intensity in his eyes stopped her. I promise, she lied. He knew it was a lie. She could see it in the way his mouth thinned, but he didn't call her on it. Instead, he turned back toward the ranch, and she followed, both of them carrying promises they had no intention of keeping. The ranch itself had become something different over these weeks. What started as a place to hide had transformed into something that felt dangerously like home. Lila knew every creak in the floorboards, every crack in the walls. She'd learned which hens laid the best eggs, which fence posts needed replacing, where the early strawberries grew wild near the creek. She'd planted a garden, neat rows of vegetables that would feed them through next winter, if she lived to see it. If. The word haunted everything now. Cole had changed too, though in ways more subtle. He smiled more, not often, but enough that Lila had learned to recognize the slight softening around his eyes that meant he was pleased. He talked more, sharing bits of ranch history or commenting on the weather or simply existing in her presence without the rigid silence that had defined their early days. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between wonder and fear, like he'd found something precious but didn't know how to hold it without breaking. They still kept their boundaries, still slept in separate rooms, still maintained the careful distance that kept things from becoming complicated. But the distance was growing harder to maintain. Lila would feel the heat of Cole's body when he stood close to adjust her shooting stance, would notice the way his eyes tracked her movements across the room, would lie awake at night thinking about the rough gentleness of his hands during her fever, the way he'd cared for her without asking for anything in return. She was falling for him, slowly, inexorably, like snow sliding off a roof, and the terrifying part was that he seemed to be falling too. One evening in late April, after a long day of fence repair, they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air was warm for the first time in months, carrying the scent of pine and new grass. Lila's muscles ached pleasantly from honest work. Cole sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, both of them too tired to maintain the usual careful distance. "Tell me about Kansas," he said suddenly. Lila blinked. "What?" "Your supposed past. We should have our stories straight in case anyone asks detailed questions." "Oh, right." She thought for a moment. "Small farm outside Wichita. Wheat and corn mostly. Parents died of fever 3 years ago. Tried to keep the farm going alone, but the drought killed the crops. Bank foreclosed. I had nothing left, so I headed west looking for work." "Brothers? Sisters?" "Only child. You?" Cole was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had a brother once, James. He was younger, always getting into trouble. I spent half my childhood pulling him out of scrapes." "What happened to him?" "War happened. He enlisted in 61, Cavalry Regiment, died at Shiloh." Cole's voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "He was 17 years old." Lila's hand found his without conscious thought, fingers curling around his calloused palm. "I'm sorry." "Long time ago now." But his hand tightened on hers, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "After that I headed west. Figured there was nothing left for me back east. Worked cattle drives, saved money, bought this land, built everything you see with my own hands. And then Emma found you." "And then Emma found me," he agreed softly. "Or I found her. I was never quite sure which." He turned to look at Lila, his eyes dark in the fading light. "She showed up one winter, half frozen and desperate. Said she was running from an arranged marriage, from a life she didn't want. I believed her, helped her, fell in love with her. She was lucky to have that time with you, however brief it was." "Was she? Or did loving me just get her killed faster?" "Cole, sometimes I think I'm cursed, Lila. Everyone I care about ends up dead or broken, My brother, Emma. Maybe you should run while you still can. Lila shifted to face him fully, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm not running. Not from you. Not anymore. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. A reason to stop hiding, to stand and fight. You've taught me to defend myself, to trust again. You've made me feel human instead of hunted. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You've made me feel like maybe I deserve to survive this. Cole's hand came up to cover hers, his rough palm warm against her fingers. You deserve more than survival. You deserve a life. So do you. They stared at each other in the dying light, the air between them charged with everything they hadn't said, everything they were still too afraid to name. Cole's thumb traced across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. We should go inside, he said, but he didn't move. We should, Lila agreed, but she didn't move either. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Cole leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, soft and questioning, and Lila felt something inside her crack wide open. All the fear and loneliness and desperate hope she'd been carrying pouring out in a single shared breath. She kissed him back, her hand sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. Cole made a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss, his arms coming around her waist to lift her against him. For a moment there was nothing but this, the taste of him, the solid strength of his body, the way he held her like she was something precious and breakable and worth protecting. Then reality crashed back in. Lila pulled away, breathing hard, her hands shaking. We can't. Not yet. Not while... I know. Cole's voice was rough. I know. You were right before. We wait until this is over. Until you're safe. And if I'm never safe, his arms tightened around her, then I'll make you safe. Whatever it takes. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment like a stone through glass. They jerked apart, both reaching for weapons that weren't there. Cole's rifle was inside, Lila's revolver in her room. The rider came fast, pushing his horse hard, and as he emerged from the tree line, Lila's blood turned to ice. Thomas Everett. He pulled up 20 feet from the porch, his pale horse lathered with sweat. The investigator looked different than he had on the road, harder, more certain. His coat was dusty from travel, and his eyes burned with the intensity of a man who'd found what he was looking for. Evening, Mr. Barrett, he said, his voice carrying across the space between them. Miss Carter. Cole stepped in front of Lila, his body a shield. Everett, didn't expect to see you again. I'm sure you didn't. Everett dismounted, his movements deliberate and slow. I've been doing some research, asking questions, following trails. And you know what I found? Can't imagine. I found that you hired Miss Carter here in November, not September like you told me. The general store keeps records, Mr. Barrett, dates of purchases, names of buyers. You didn't stock up for an extra person until late November, which means she couldn't have been here in October when the murder happened. Cole's hand moved to his belt, where he usually kept his revolver. It wasn't there. Your math's wrong. My math is perfect, and my instincts even better. Everett's gaze shifted to Lila, pinning her like a butterfly to a board. You're her, the woman from St. Louis, the seamstress who murdered Marcus Brennan in his own boarding house. I didn't murder anyone, Lila said, her voice steadier than she felt. I defended myself. That's for a jury to decide, not you, not him. Everett reached into his coat. Cole moved faster than Lila had ever seen him move, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He caught Everett's wrist before the investigator could draw whatever weapon he was reaching for, twisting it hard. Everett yelped and dropped to his knees. You're making a mistake, Everett gasped. Assaulting a lawman. You're not a lawman. You're a bounty hunter with a fancy title. Cole's voice was ice cold. And you're trespassing on my land. I have a warrant, legal authority to bring her back. Show me. If Everett fumbled in his coat with his free hand, producing a folded document. Cole snatched it, his eyes scanning the page. His expression darkened. This is Missouri jurisdiction. Doesn't mean a damn thing in Wyoming territory. It means everything. I can have the territorial marshal here in 3 days. You want to explain to him why you're harboring a fugitive? I want to explain to him why a private investigator is harassing innocent ranch workers based on speculation and bad record keeping. Cole released Everett's wrist with a shove that sent the man sprawling. Get off my land, now! Everett climbed to his feet, cradling his wrist, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. I'm writing to the marshal's office tonight. He'll come with men and proper authority. And when he does, all your posturing won't mean a thing. She'll hang Mr. Barrett, and you'll be arrested for obstruction. Then he better bring a lot of men, because I'm not giving her up without a fight. The words hung in the air, a line drawn in blood and dirt. Everett's eyes widened slightly, reassessing. Then he smiled that cold smile Lila remembered from the road. A fight it is, then. 3 days, Mr. Barrett. Maybe 4 if the weather slows us down. Use that time wisely. He swung back onto his horse, wincing at the movement. And Miss Carter, I'd make peace with your fate. There's no running from this. Not anymore. He wheeled the horse and galloped away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Cole and Lila stood frozen on the porch, the echo of hoofbeats fading into silence. 3 days, Lila whispered. 3 days, Cole confirmed. He turned to her, his face set with grim determination. We need to decide. Right now. Do you run, or do we stand? Every instinct screamed at her to run. She'd been running for so long it was the only thing that made sense. Pack her bag, take a horse, disappear into the mountains before the marshal arrived. She could be in Montana in a week, Canada in 2. Keep moving, keep hiding, keep surviving alone. But she looked at Cole's face, at the man who'd protected her, trained her, believed her when no one else would, and running suddenly felt like the worst kind of cowardice. I'm done running, she said. If they want me, they'll have to take me by force. Something flickered in Cole's eyes, pride maybe, or fear. You understand what that means? If we fight, if we resist arrest, there's no going back. We'll both be outlaws. I'm already an outlaw. At least this way I'm not one alone. Cole nodded slowly. Then we prepare for war. Come on. He strode into the cabin with Lila close behind. Inside he moved with military efficiency, gathering weapons and ammunition, laying everything out on the table. 3 rifles, 4 revolvers, boxes of cartridges, cleaning supplies. The ranch has good defensive positions, he said, his mind clearly racing through tactics. We board up the windows, reinforce the door, stockpile water and food inside. If they try to storm us, we have the high ground and better cover. How many men will the marshal bring? Hard to say. Could be 2, could be 10. Depends on how seriously he takes Everett's story. Cole loaded one of the rifles, his movements automatic. But Wyoming marshals aren't fools. They'll know a siege could turn bloody. They'll try to talk first. And when talking fails, then we make it cost them more than they're willing to pay. He looked up, his eyes fierce. I meant what I said, Lila. I'm not giving you up. If that means going to war with the territorial government, so be it. You do that? Give up everything you've built here? Cole's hand found hers squeezing tight. I already gave up everything once when I didn't fight for Emma. I won't make that mistake again. You're worth fighting for, worth burning it all down for if that's what it takes. Lila's throat closed around words she couldn't speak. Instead, she pulled him close, pressing her forehead to his. Then we fight together, no matter what comes. They spent the night preparing. Cole showed Lila how to fortify the cabin. Heavy furniture pushed against windows, extra bars across the door, water barrels filled and positioned strategically. They moved supplies from the cellar, stacking them in corners where bullets couldn't reach. Cole climbed onto the roof and reinforced weak spots, creating firing positions that would give them clear shots at anyone approaching. In the barn, they prepared the horses for a quick escape if it came to that. Fresh shoes, saddles checked and double-checked, saddlebags packed with supplies and ammunition. A last resort, Cole called it, but necessary. As dawn approached, they sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and wired with adrenaline. The cabin looked like a fortress now, transformed from home to battleground. We should eat, Cole said. Sleep in shifts, stay sharp. But neither of them moved. They sat in the gray pre-dawn light, hands clasped on the table between them, 2 people facing down the storm. Tell me about after, Lila said softly. If we survive this, what happens then? Cole's thumb traced circles on her palm. We rebuild. Start over somewhere they can't find us. Montana, maybe. Or further north. And us? What about us? What are we, Cole? What is this? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. I don't know what to call it. All I know is that the thought of losing you makes me want to burn the world down. That when I picture the future, you're in it. That somewhere between hiring you and now, you stopped being just someone I was protecting and became someone I can't imagine living without. Lila's breath caught. That sounds like love. Maybe it is. Hell, I don't know. I'm not good with words. His hand tightened on hers. But I know I'd die for you. Does that count? I'd rather you live for me. Then that's what I'll do. We'll both live. Get through this. Start over. Build something new together. He pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Sound good? Sounds perfect. They stayed like that as the sun rose, painting the cabin in shades of gold and amber. Outside, birds sang their morning songs, oblivious to the violence coming. Inside, two people held on to each other and waited for the world to end or begin. They weren't sure which. The first day passed in tense watchfulness. They took turns on the roof, scanning the horizon for riders. None came. Cole rode the property line, checking for signs of approach from unexpected directions. Found nothing. The second day was worse. The waiting frayed their nerves, turned every sound into a potential threat. Lila caught herself jumping at the crack of settling wood, the rustle of wind in the trees. Cole grew quieter, more focused, his eyes constantly scanning. That night, they slept in shifts again. Lila took first watch, positioned at the window with a rifle across her lap. The moonlight turned the landscape silver and strange, full of shadows that might be men or might be nothing. Her eyes burned from staring into the darkness, looking for movement that never came. Cole relieved her at midnight. Get some rest. I'll wake you if anything changes. But sleep wouldn't come. Lila lay in her bed, fully dressed, listening to Cole move through the cabin. After an hour of futile trying, she gave up and joined him in the main room. He sat in the armchair near the cold fireplace, rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. When Lila appeared, he didn't seem surprised. Can't sleep either? She asked. Nope. She sat on the floor beside his chair, leaning against his leg. His hand came down to rest on her shoulder, heavy and warm and steadying. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What scares you most? Cole was silent for a moment. Failing you, watching them take you away and not being able to stop it, surviving this alone. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Living the rest of my life knowing I found something worth fighting for and lost it anyway. Lila reached up, covering his hand with hers. We won't lose. We can't. We might. Then we lose together, but we don't give up. We don't surrender. We make them work for every inch. Even if it means dying? She twisted to look up at him, her eyes fierce. Especially if it means dying. I'd rather die free with you than live in chains without you. Cole slid from the chair to the floor beside her, pulling her against his chest. She felt his heart hammering against her back, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. I love you, he said suddenly. I know it's bad timing. I know we're probably going to die in the next day or two. But I need you to know. Whatever happens, I love you, Lila Carter. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Lila turned in his arms, her hands framing his face. I love you too. And we're not going to die. We're going to win and survive and build that future you talked about. Together. She kissed him then, pouring everything into it, all her fear and hope and desperate love. Cole kissed her back like she was air and he was drowning, his arms crushing her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the first light of dawn was creeping through the cracks in the shutters. The third day had arrived. They spent the morning in final preparations, checking weapons, reviewing plans, saying everything and nothing. By noon, the tension was unbearable. Lila paced the cabin like a caged animal while Cole stood watch at the window, his stillness more unnerving than her motion. Maybe he won't come, Lila said for the 10th time. Maybe the marshal didn't believe him. He'll come. How do you know? Because men like Everett always follow through. It's not about justice for them. It's about winning. And he thinks he's already won. Then he's in for a surprise. Cole's mouth twitched in something that might have been a smile. Yeah, he is. The sound of multiple horses approaching came just after 2 in the afternoon. Cole's hand shot up, silencing Lila before she could speak. They moved to their positions, Cole at the front window, Lila at the side, both with loaded rifles. Through the gap in the shutters, Lila counted riders. 6 men, not including Everett. The marshal rode at the front, distinguishable by the star pinned to his coat. He was older than she expected, gray-haired and weathered, sitting his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. They stopped 30 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose line. The marshal raised his hand, a gesture of parley. "Cole Barrett," he called. "This is Marshal William Hawkins. I'm here on official business regarding a fugitive from Missouri. We need to talk." Cole cracked open a shutter, his rifle barrel visible. "Then talk, Marshal, but stay where you are." Hawkins nodded, unperturbed. "I've got a warrant here for a woman named Lila Carter, wanted for murder in St. Louis. I'm told she's inside with you. That true?" "What if it is?" "Then I need you to send her out peacefully. No one has to get hurt here, Cole. This can be settled civilized." "She didn't murder anyone. She defended herself against a man who attacked her in her own room. The law back east didn't care to hear her side. Why should I trust you'll be any different?" "Because I'm not from back east," Hawkins said calmly. "And because I've seen enough of the world to know there's usually more to a story than what's written in a warrant. But that doesn't change the fact that I've got legal authority here and you don't. She needs to come back with me, face a proper court." The proper court already made up its mind before she ever walked in. They'll hang her for defending herself. Maybe. Maybe not. But that's not for you to decide. "The hell it isn't." Cole's voice hardened. "She's under my protection. You want her? You'll have to go through me." Hawkins sighed, looking genuinely regretful. "Don't make me do this, Cole. I know who you are. Know what you've built here. You're a good man. Don't throw it all away for someone you barely know." "I know her well enough." "Do you? Did she tell you what really happened in that room? Did she mention that Brennan was a city councilman, that his death sparked riots, that St. Louis nearly tore itself apart over this? She's not some innocent victim. She's a killer who ran instead of facing justice." From her position, Lila felt the words like physical blows. Riots. She hadn't known, hadn't stayed long enough to see what her desperate act of survival had triggered, but Cole's voice didn't waver. Then maybe St. Louis should have asked why a city councilman was alone in a seamstress's room at night. Maybe they should have wondered what he was doing that made her fear for her life. "I know what I need to know, Marshal, and I'm not giving her up. Final warning, Cole, stand down or we come in." "Then come in, but a lot of you won't walk back out." The marshal's face hardened. He raised his hand, signaling his men. They spread wider, moving to surround the cabin. "Last chance," Hawkins shouted. Cole looked back at Lila, his eyes asking a silent question. She nodded once, raising her rifle. Together, they would stand. Together, they would fight. Together, they would face whatever came next. Cole fired first, not at the men, but at the ground 3 feet in front of Marshal Hawkins' horse. The animal reared, forcing Hawkins to fight for control while his deputies scattered for cover. It was a warning shot, clear as thunder, and everyone understood its message. "Next one won't miss," Cole shouted. The deputies had drawn their weapons, taking position behind whatever cover they could find. Trees, rocks, the water trough near the barn. Everett hung back, his pale face visible behind a thick pine trunk, content to let the law do his dirty work. "Cole, don't be a fool." Hawkins had his horse under control now, though he'd moved back 20 yards. "You fire on lawmen, there's no coming back from that. You'll be hunted from here to California." "Then you better make sure your first shot counts, Marshal, because I won't hesitate with my second." Lila's hands trembled on her rifle, adrenaline singing through her veins. Through her narrow window gap, she could see 2 deputies trying to flank around the east side of the cabin. She adjusted her aim, tracking their movement. "Cole," she said quietly. "East side, 2 of them moving up." "I see them. Fire a warning. Let them know we've got all angles covered." Lila squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as the bullet thudded into the dirt between the 2 advancing deputies. They froze, then scrambled back toward better cover. "The woman can shoot," one of them yelled. "Marshal, they've got the cabin locked down tight." Hawkins swore, loud enough for Lila to hear. She could see him thinking, calculating the cost of a full assault. 6 men against 2 seemed like good odds until you factored in fortified positions and defenders who had nothing to lose. Cole Barrett, listen to me. Hawkins's voice carried a different tone now, less authoritative, more negotiating. I don't want bloodshed here. I've got a job to do, but I'm not looking to die for it. What if we talk this through, face to face, just you and me? Cole glanced at Lila. She shook her head minutely. It was a trap. Had to be. Get Cole out in the open, take him down, then storm the cabin while she was alone. But Cole's expression was thoughtful. What guarantees? He called back. My word, I come unarmed, you come unarmed. We talk in the open where both sides can see. No tricks, no surprises. If we can't reach an agreement, I go back to my men and we figure out next steps. Your word against 6 armed men backing you up. Not exactly balanced odds. Then you bring the woman, let her speak for herself, tell her side of the story. Maybe there's a solution here that doesn't end with bodies in the dirt. Lila's stomach clenched. Speak for herself? To a marshal who'd already decided she was guilty, surrounded by men with guns? It was suicide. But something in Hawkins's voice, a weariness, maybe, or genuine reluctance to start a bloodbath, made her hesitate. No, Cole said flatly. She's not exposing herself to your men. Then we're at an impasse. And eventually, Cole, you'll run out of ammunition or water or luck. I can wait. Can you? The truth of it settled like lead in Lila's chest. They had supplies for maybe a week if they rationed carefully. But after that, they'd be forced out or forced to surrender. And if they tried to run, the deputies would hunt them across every mile of open territory. Let me talk to him, Lila said. Absolutely not. Cole, he's right. We can't stay locked in here forever. Maybe if they hear my side, they won't care about your side. All they see is a warrant and a reward. Then what's your plan? Shoot it out until we're both dead? Because that's where this is heading. Cole's jaw worked, muscles jumping beneath his skin. He knew she was right, hated it, but knew it. If we go out there, he said slowly, we go together. You don't leave my sight for a second. First sign of trouble, we run for the horses. Agreed? Agreed. Cole turned back to the window. Marshal, we'll talk, but we both come armed. You want a conversation? That's the price. A long pause, then. Fair enough. Meet me in the middle ground. 10 minutes. Give us time to stand down. Cole pulled back from the window, his face grim. Could be a trap. Could be our only chance. They checked their weapons with mechanical precision. Revolvers loaded and holstered, rifles left behind but knives strapped within easy reach. Lila braided her hair back tight, not wanting anything obscuring her vision. Cole shrugged into his heavy coat despite the mild temperature, the leather thick enough to slow a bullet. Stay close to me, he said, his hand finding hers. Whatever happens, stay close. They removed the bar from the door, the scrape of wood against wood sounding too loud in the tense silence. Cole pushed it open slowly, his hand on his revolver. The afternoon sun was blinding after the cabin's dimness. Lila blinked against the glare, her eyes adjusting to see the deputies had indeed pulled back, creating an open space between the cabin and their position. Marshal Hawkins stood in the center of that space, his coat open to show no concealed weapons, his hands visible and empty. He was older up close, 60s maybe, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades on the frontier. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Thank you for coming out, he said as they approached. Miss Carter, I presume. I am. Lila's voice was steadier than she felt. I'm Marshal William Hawkins. I've been in law enforcement for 37 years. Seen a lot in that time. Enough to know that warrants don't always tell the whole story. He gestured to a fallen log near the tree line. Shall we sit? Have a civilized conversation? They sat, though Cole positioned himself where he could see both Hawkins and his deputies. Lila perched on the edge of the log, coiled tight as a spring. Tell me what happened in St. Louis, Hawkins said. Your version. I want to hear it. So Lila told him. All of it. The boarding house. The wealthy client who'd seemed so kind at first. The promises that turned to demands. The night he'd come to her room drunk and insistent. The way he'd grabbed her when she tried to leave. The marks his hands had left on her wrists. The scissors she'd grabbed in desperation. The way he'd lunged at her despite her warnings. The horrible moment when the blade found his throat. I didn't mean to kill him, she said, her voice breaking. I just wanted him to stop, to leave me alone. But he kept coming and I was so scared. So you ran instead of reporting it. To who? The police who drink at the same clubs as Marcus Brennan? The judges who attend the same parties? I was nobody, Marshall. A seamstress who rented a room by the week. He was a city councilman with money and connections. Who do you think they'd believe? Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. The riots that followed his death. Did you know about those? Lila shook her head, shame flooding through her. I ran that same night. Didn't look back. His supporters claimed you were a radical, that you'd killed him for his political views. His opponents claimed he'd been corrupt, that you were a hired assassin. The truth got lost somewhere in the middle while the city tore itself apart. Hawkins sighed. 17 people died in those riots, Miss Carter. Stores burned, families destroyed. Whether you meant to or not, your actions sparked a powder keg. The words hit like physical blows. 17 people. Dead because she'd defended herself, because she'd run instead of staying to face impossible odds. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. I also believe you were defending yourself from a man who had no right to be in your room, making demands he had no right to make. Hawkins leaned forward, his voice gentling. But Miss Carter, the law is the law. You killed a man and fled the jurisdiction. That's murder and flight to avoid prosecution. I can't just ignore that, no matter what I personally believe about your circumstances. So what are you saying? Cole's voice was hard. That she should surrender, go back to face a mob trial? I'm saying there might be another way. A better way. Hawkins pulled out a folded document. I took the liberty of wiring the circuit judge who will hear her case, explained some of the circumstances, asked about the possibility of a self-defense plea. He was receptive. Not promising, but receptive. Receptive how? Lila asked. He's willing to consider testimony about Brennan's character, his history with women. Turns out Miss Carter wasn't the first woman he'd cornered. There have been complaints, settlements, accusations swept under the rug by his family's money. If we can establish a pattern of predatory behavior, we might be able to argue legitimate self-defense. Hope flickered in Lila's chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. You'd help me? Testify about what I told you? I would, and I think Cole here would too. A respected rancher vouching for your character, saying you've worked honestly and well for months? That carries weight. Hawkins looked between them. But here's the catch. You'd have to come back willingly. Face the court, trust the system. No guarantees it'll work out in your favor. You could still hang. Or she could spend the rest of her life running, Cole said. Looking over her shoulder, never safe, never settled. That's not living either. Lila stared at her hands, mind racing. Go back to street. Lewis, walk voluntarily into the same system that had already branded her a murderer? Trust that this time, with Hawkins's help and Cole's testimony, justice might actually prevail? The thought terrified her. But the alternative, running forever, dragging Cole into a fugitive's life, never able to build anything real or lasting, that terrified her more. If I go back, she said slowly, and the trial goes against me, what happens to Cole? He harbored a fugitive, lied to a lawman. Doesn't that make him an accessory? Technically, yes, but I'm willing to overlook that if you come peacefully. Call it misplaced loyalty, not criminal intent. Cole's hand found Lila's, squeezing hard. You don't have to do this. We can still run. Montana, Canada, somewhere they'll never find us. And spend every day wondering when it'll catch up to us? When someone will recognize me or another investigator will show up. Lila turned to face him. You said you wanted to stop just existing and start living. This is how we do that. We face it, we fight it the right way, and we either win our freedom or we go down knowing we tried. I could lose you. You could lose me anyway if we run. At least this way we're fighting for a real future, not just survival. Cole's eyes were bright with emotion he was fighting to control. You're the bravest person I've ever known. You know that? I learned it from you. Hawkins cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. So what's it going to be, Miss Carter? Do we do this the civilized way, or do my deputies and I have to play this out the hard way? Lila took a deep breath, squeezed Cole's hand one more time, then released it. I'll come back. Voluntarily. On one condition. What's that? Cole comes with me. As a witness, as my advocate, whatever you want to call it. But he comes. I'm not doing this alone. Hawkins looked at Cole. You willing to leave your ranch for months? Maybe longer? It's a hard trip back to St. Louis, and the trial could drag on. I'd follow her to hell if that's what it took, Cole said simply. Missouri's nothing. Then we have an agreement. Hawkins stood, extending his hand. Miss Carter, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Marcus Brennan. You have the right to— Wait, the voice came from behind them. Thomas Everett emerged from the tree line, his face twisted with anger. This is outrageous. She's a fugitive, a killer. You can't just make deals with her. I'm the marshal, Mr. Everett. I can make whatever deals I see fit. My client's family paid me good money to bring her back for justice, not negotiate some sweetheart arrangement. Everett's hand moved toward his coat. If you won't do your job, then I'll— He never finished the sentence. His hand emerged holding a Derringer, the small pistol aimed at Lila's chest. Cole moved faster than thought, his body intercepting the line of fire just as Everett pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the clearing. Cole grunted, stumbling back into Lila. She caught him, horror flooding through her as she saw the blood spreading across his shoulder. Cole! Everything happened at once. Hawkins drew his own weapon, shouting orders. Deputies swarmed Everett, wrestling him to the ground. The Derringer clattered away across the rocks. Lila lowered Cole carefully, her hands pressing against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. I'm okay, Cole gasped. It's just my shoulder. I'm okay. But the blood kept coming, hot and red between Lila's fingers. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good. No lead to dig out. But the wound was bad, too close to major vessels. Someone get bandages, Hawkins barked. He knelt beside them, his weathered hand surprisingly gentle as he examined the wound. Through and through. You're lucky, Barrett. 2 inches lower and it would have hit your lung. Doesn't feel lucky, Cole gritted out. One of the deputies ran up with a medical kit. Hawkins worked efficiently, packing the wound front and back, wrapping it tight. Cole's face had gone pale, but he stayed conscious, his eyes finding Lila's. Worth it, he said through clenched teeth. He was aiming for you. I'd take 100 bullets before I let him hurt you. Tears blurred Lila's vision. You stupid, brave, impossible man. That's why you love me. Despite everything, she laughed, a broken, desperate sound. Yeah, it is. Hawkins finished bandaging, sitting back on his heels. He needs proper medical attention. We'll take him to Doc Morrison in Clearwater. It's closer than trying to make it back to the territorial capital. What about Everett? Lila asked, looking at where the investigator lay pinned under 2 deputies, still struggling. Assault with a deadly weapon on multiple witnesses. He'll be facing charges of his own. Hawkins's face was grim. Seems Mr. Everett cared more about his bounty than about actual justice. That doesn't sit well with me. They moved Cole carefully to one of the horses, supporting him on both sides. He was fading in and out now, the blood loss and shock taking their toll. Lila rode beside him, one hand gripping his belt to steady him, the other on her reins. The ride to Clearwater felt eternal. Cole slumped forward, barely conscious, his breathing shallow. Lila talked to him constantly, refusing to let him slip away into the darkness. Stay with me. Just a little further. You promised me a future, remember? Can't deliver on that if you bleed out before we get there. Cole? Cole, answer me. Still here, he mumbled. Not going anywhere without you. Damn right you're not. Doc Morrison's office was above the general store, reached by an exterior staircase. They carried Cole up, Lila refusing to leave his side, even when the doctor tried to shoo her out. She stays, Cole said, his voice weak but firm. Where I can see her. Morrison sighed but didn't argue. He was an older man with steady hands and kind eyes, the kind of doctor who'd seen every type of frontier injury imaginable. He cleaned the wound thoroughly, stitched both sides with careful precision, and administered laudanum for the pain. He'll live, Morrison said finally. Barring infection, bullet missed everything vital. He'll be weak for a few weeks, shoulder will be stiff for months, but he'll recover fully. The relief was so intense Lila's knees nearly buckled. Thank you so much. Thank him for having sense enough to get shot in a survivable location. Morrison cleaned his instruments, his movements methodical. Marshal Hawkins says you folks had quite an eventful afternoon. You could say that. Well, your man here is going to need rest. Real rest. No riding for at least a week, preferably 2, and then a slow journey with frequent stops. He pushes too hard, that wound could reopen and we'll be back where we started. Lila looked at Hawkins, who'd been waiting in the corner. What does this mean for going back to street? Lewis? It means we wait. Let Barrett heal up properly. The circuit judge isn't hearing cases until late June anyway. We've got time. Hawkins pulled up a chair, straddling it backward. Miss Carter, I need to know your intentions. Are you still willing to come back voluntarily, or has today changed your mind? She looked at Cole, unconscious now from the laudanum, his face peaceful in drugged sleep. This man who'd taken a bullet for her, who'd been willing to burn down his whole life to protect her. She owed him more than running. She owed him the chance at the real future they'd talked about. I'm still willing, she said. We see this through, the right way. Good. Then here's what happens next. You'll stay here in Clearwater while Barrett heals. I'll wire the judge, explain the delay. Everett's being held for assault. He won't be bothering you anymore. When Barrett's strong enough to travel, we all go back to St. Louis together. I'll testify about your cooperation, about the circumstances. Barrett will testify about your character. We'll dig up everything we can find about Brennan's history with women, and we'll pray that justice actually means something. And if it doesn't, Hawkins' expression was grave. Then at least you'll face it, knowing you tried. That counts for something. The next days blurred together. Lila stayed by Cole's side, sleeping in a chair beside his bed, changing his bandages, forcing water and broth down him when the fever came. Because of course the fever came. Infection setting in despite Morrison's best efforts, turning Cole's skin hot and his words delirious. He talked in his fever dreams, fragments of memory spilling out. About his brother James, dying in a field hospital. About Emma, her body broken in a ravine. About his fear of failing everyone he loved, of being cursed to watch them die. Not this time, Lila whispered, bathing his forehead with cool cloths. You're not losing me. I'm right here. I'm staying. The fever broke on the 4th day. Cole woke lucid, weak, but clear-eyed. Did I die? Not for lack of trying. Damn, I had this whole death speech planned. Save it for when we're old and gray. I'm not ready to hear it yet. He smiled, the expression transforming his haggard face. Old and gray. I like the sound of that. Me too. As Cole recovered, the town's attitude toward them shifted. Word had spread about Everett's attack, about Cole taking a bullet to protect Lila. Suddenly, she wasn't a fugitive in their eyes. She was a woman who'd been wronged, defending herself against further violence. People brought food to Morrison's office. Mrs. Patterson, who'd thought Lila looked familiar, came to apologize for her suspicious nature. Even Sarah Walsh showed up, though her visit was brief and uncomfortable. I misjudged you, Sarah said stiffly. I thought you were just another drifter taking advantage of Cole's isolation. I see now that I was wrong. Thank you for saying so. He loves you. I've known him for 5 years and never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Sarah's voice was wistful. Take care of him. He deserves happiness after everything he's lost. I will, I promise. 2 weeks after the shooting, Cole was strong enough to sit up, to take short walks around the room. 3 weeks, and he could manage the stairs with support. Morrison reluctantly cleared him for travel, with strict instructions about rest and wound care. You're a stubborn fool, Barrett, the doctor said, but you're a lucky one. That woman of yours has the healing touch. She's probably the only reason you pulled through. She's the only reason for most things, Cole agreed. They prepared for this journey back to St. Louis with meticulous care. Hawkins arranged for a wagon instead of horses, with padding to cushion the rough roads. They'd travel slowly, stopping frequently, taking the railroad where possible to ease the strain. The trip would take weeks instead of days, but Cole's health was more important than speed. The night before they left, Lila and Cole sat on the porch of the boarding house where they'd been staying, watching the sun set behind the mountains one last time. Having second thoughts? Cole asked. About going back? No, about dragging you into this. Every minute. I'm exactly where I want to be, where I choose to be. His good arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. Whatever happens in St. Louis, we face it together. And when it's over, when you're free, we come back here. Rebuild the ranch, build a life. Maybe add some rooms to that cabin. Raise some kids if you're willing. Grow old and gray, like you said. What if I'm not freed? What if the trial goes against me? Then we'll figure out our next move. But I have faith, Lila. Faith in you, in the truth, in the idea that sometimes, just sometimes, justice actually works. Lila leaned into him, breathing in his scent, leather and wood smoke and something uniquely Cole. I love you. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. You changed my life, gave me a reason to stop running and start fighting. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you showed up. Now I'm living. That's a gift I can never repay. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, bright and infinite in the clear Wyoming sky. Tomorrow they'd start the journey back to face her past. But tonight, they had this: each other, the mountains, the promise of a future worth fighting for. Marshal Hawkins appeared in the doorway behind them. Wagon's loaded. We leave at first light. You two should get some rest. Thank you, Marshal, Lila said, for believing me, for helping us. Just doing my job the way it should be done, with an eye toward justice, not just law. He tipped his hat. See you at dawn. Cole and Lila stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside. They climbed the stairs to their separate rooms. Propriety still mattered even now, but paused in the hallway between doors. I'll see you in the morning, Cole said. In the morning, Lila agreed. But neither of them moved. They stood there caught between what was proper and what they wanted, until finally Cole closed the distance between them. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, pouring everything into it, all his love and fear and desperate hope. Whatever happens, he said when they finally broke apart, you're not alone. Never again. Neither are you. They separated reluctantly, each retreating to their own rooms. But as Lila lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of safety, she was riding toward danger, not away from it, but the peace of knowing she was done running, done hiding, done letting fear dictate her choices. Tomorrow, she'd start the journey back to face the consequences of that terrible night in St. Louis, back to face a trial that could end with her neck in a noose, back to face a city that had already decided she was guilty. But she wouldn't face it alone. Cole would be there. Hawkins would be there. And somewhere inside her, she'd found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The strength to stand and fight instead of run and hide. The old Lila would have fled in the night, taken a horse, and disappeared into the mountains. But that woman was gone. Transformed by frontier winters and gentle hands and a love that demanded she be brave enough to claim it. The new Lila would face the storm head on, would tell her truth without apology, would fight for the future she deserved with everything she had. And if she lost, if the trial went against her despite Hawkins's testimony and Cole's support, then at least she'd go down knowing she'd tried, that she'd been brave, that she'd stopped being a victim and become a fighter. That was worth more than any amount of running could ever be. The journey back to St. Louis took 3 weeks of hard travel, every mile carrying them closer to a reckoning Lila could feel in her bones. They moved slowly for Cole's sake, his shoulder still healing beneath the bandages, though he insisted he was fine even when his face went pale with pain. The wagon rattled over rough roads, through towns that blurred together, past landscapes that shifted from mountain to prairie to the green density of Missouri bottomland. Marshal Hawkins rode alongside them, his presence both protection and reminder of what awaited. He'd proven himself more than just a lawman during those weeks. He listened to Lila's story again and again, asking questions that sharpened her testimony, pointing out inconsistencies that a hostile prosecutor would exploit. He was preparing her for war, and Lila was grateful for it. They'll try to paint you as a scheming woman who lured Brennan to your room, Hawkins said one evening as they camped beside a creek. They'll say you planned it, that you wanted his money or his influence. You need to be ready for those accusations without losing your composure. How do I stay composed when they're calling me a liar and a whore? By remembering that the truth is on your side. By knowing that Cole and I will be right there backing up every word you say. Hawkins poked at the fire with a stick. And by understanding that anger is what they want. A hysterical woman confirms their prejudices. A calm, clear-eyed woman telling her truth? That's harder to dismiss. Cole sat beside her, his good arm wrapped around her waist. You're the strongest person I know. You'll make them hear you. What if strength isn't enough? Then we go to plan B. What's plan B? Cole's smile was grim. I haven't figured that out yet, but I promise you, there is one. You're not hanging, Lila. Not while I'm breathing. St. Louis announced itself first by smell, the thick, muddy reek of the Mississippi River, coal smoke and sewage and humanity pressed together. Then by sound, factory whistles, steamboat horns, the endless noise of a city that never slept. Lila's stomach clenched as familiar streets appeared, buildings she recognized from her old life looming like tombstones. They'd arranged lodging at a boarding house on the outskirts, not the same one where everything had happened, but close enough that Lila felt ghosts around every corner. The landlady, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Kowalski, looked at their party with undisguised curiosity. Marshal Hawkins, welcome back, and these must be your witnesses. Her gaze lingered on Lila. The Carter woman, I presume? Miss Carter is under my protection, Hawkins said firmly. She's cooperating fully with the investigation. I trust she'll be treated with appropriate respect. Of course, Marshal. Of course. But Mrs. Kowalski's eyes said she'd already passed judgment. The trial was set for 3 days hence, giving them time to meet with the court-appointed defense attorney and finalize their strategy. The attorney, a young man named David Chen, had the eager intensity of someone who believed the law could actually deliver justice. Lila wanted to trust that optimism, but years of running had taught her to expect betrayal. The prosecution's case is circumstantial, Chen explained, spreading documents across the table in their rented room. They have no witnesses to what happened in that room. Only the aftermath, a dead councilman and a missing seamstress. Their narrative relies entirely on character assassination, painting Brennan as a pillar of the community and you as a desperate woman with motive and opportunity. What's our counter-narrative, Cole asked. The truth, that Marcus Brennan had a documented history of inappropriate behavior toward working-class women. I found 3 other women willing to testify that he made unwanted advances, offered money for sexual favors, threatened their employment when they refused. Chen's eyes gleamed with righteous anger. One was a laundress, one worked in his household, one was a clerk at a shop he frequented. All kept silent because who would believe them over a city councilman? Hope flickered in Lila's chest. They'll actually testify. Put themselves through that. They will, because they're tired of men like Brennan getting away with it, tired of being silenced. Chen looked at her directly. You defended yourself, Miss Carter. These women see that as an act of courage. They want to help you. The first day of trial arrived with oppressive summer heat that turned the courtroom into a sweltering box of judgment. The gallery was packed. Sensation seekers, journalists, people with nothing better to do than watch a woman fight for her life. Lila sat at the defense table in a simple gray dress, her hands folded to hide their trembling, while Cole sat directly behind her in the first row of public seating. Every time doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she'd glance back and find his steady gaze, his silent promise that she wasn't alone. The prosecution opened with theatrical flourish, painting Marcus Brennan as a devoted public servant cut down in his prime by a calculating seductress. The prosecutor, a silver-haired man named Harrison, who'd clearly tried hundreds of cases, paced before the jury with practiced outrage. Gentlemen of the jury, you will hear testimony that Marcus Brennan was a man of impeccable character, a councilman who fought for the working people of this city, a devoted son and brother. A man whose only crime was showing kindness to a desperate woman who repaid that kindness with cold-blooded murder. Lila forced herself to breathe steadily, to keep her face neutral even as Harrison described her as a conniving temptress who'd lured Brennan to her room with promises of affection before stabbing him in a fit of rage when he wouldn't give her money. Chen stood for the defense, his youth making him seem almost fragile compared to Harrison's polished authority. But his voice rang clear and strong. The prosecution would have you believe this is a simple case of murder, but nothing about this case is simple. You will hear testimony from women who knew Marcus Brennan's true character. You will hear about his pattern of predatory behavior toward vulnerable women. You will hear Miss Carter's own testimony about what happened that night. Not a murder, but a desperate act of self-defense against a man who believed his position gave him the right to take whatever he wanted. The first prosecution witnesses were character references for Brennan, colleagues who spoke of his dedication, neighbors who praised his generosity, a minister who called him a faithful congregant. Lila listened to them describe a man she'd never known, someone kind and noble who bore no resemblance to the drunk, grabbing predator who'd cornered her in her room. Then came the coroner's testimony, clinical and devastating. The angle of the wound, the depth of penetration, the evidence suggesting Brennan had been facing his attacker, not fleeing. Harrison used this to suggest premeditation. Lila had been waiting for him, scissors in hand. Isn't it true, doctor, that a wound of this nature requires significant force? Yes, considerable force. The kind of force that comes from intent, not panic, Chen objected. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained. Stick to the medical facts, Mr. Harrison. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it, would remember it. Cole testified on the second day, his presence commanding immediate attention. He described Lila's character, her work ethic, her honesty, her visible trauma when she'd first arrived at his ranch. Under Harrison's cross-examination, he didn't waver. Mr. Barrett, isn't it true you have romantic feelings for the defendant? I do. And those feelings might color your perception of her character? My feelings are based on 6 months of seeing who she really is. A woman who works harder than most men I know, who faces her fears instead of surrendering to them, who chose to come back here and face this trial rather than run. That's not the behavior of a murderer. That's the behavior of someone who knows she defended herself and is willing to trust the law to recognize that. Harrison tried to shake him, but Cole was immovable. When he finally stepped down, he caught Lila's eye, and the look that passed between them was worth more than any testimony. Marshal Hawkins followed, describing Lila's cooperation, her voluntary return, the fact that she'd had multiple opportunities to flee and had chosen to stay. His credibility as a 37-year veteran of law enforcement carried weight the jury couldn't ignore. But the most powerful testimony came from the 3 women Chen had found. They took the stand one by one, their voices shaking but determined, and described their encounters with Marcus Brennan, the unwanted touches, the crude propositions, the threats when they refused. He told me no one would believe a laundress over a councilman, the first woman said, tears streaming down her face. He said I should be grateful for his attention. When I pushed him away, he had me fired from my position. The second woman, who'd worked in Brennan's household, described late-night summons to his study where he'd corner her and make demands. I couldn't quit. I needed the wages, so I learned to avoid being alone with him, to always have another servant nearby. But he was patient. He waited for his opportunities. The third woman's testimony was the most damning. He offered me $20 to come to his rooms. When I refused, he grabbed my wrist so hard he left bruises. Said I was lucky he was being gentle about it, that other men would just take what they wanted. I reported it to my employer and was told I must have misunderstood his intentions, that a man like Mr. Brennan would never behave inappropriately. Harrison tried to discredit them, suggested they were lying for attention, that they'd been put up to this by the defense, that their testimony was irrelevant to what happened in Lila's room. But the jury was listening now, really listening, and Lila could see doubt creeping into their expressions. On the third day, Lila took the stand. Her legs felt like water as she crossed to the witness box, but she kept her spine straight, her head high. She'd been running for so long. Time to stand still and fight. Chen walked her through her testimony with gentle precision. She described her life in Street, Lewis, her work as a seamstress, her professional relationship with Brennan that had seemed harmless at first. Then the shift, the way his compliments became more personal, his visits more frequent, his suggestions more inappropriate. He said he could help my career, Lila said, her voice steady. Said he knew people who could get me better positions. All I had to do was be friendly to him. When I told him I wasn't interested in that kind of help, he laughed, said I was being naive, that this was how the world worked. She described the night of the killing in detail that made her stomach turn, his pounding on her door, his slurred speech, the way he'd forced his way inside despite her protests, the smell of whiskey on his breath, his hands on her body, tearing at her dress, her screams that no one came to answer. I grabbed the scissors from my sewing table. I told him to leave. I begged him to leave. He just laughed and said I should stop playing hard to get. Lila's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. He grabbed me again. I pushed him away. He came at me, and I struck out. I didn't think. I just wanted him to stop touching me. Wanted him to leave. When I realized what I'd done, he was on the floor and there was so much blood. What did you do then? I ran. I knew no one would believe me. A poor seamstress against a councilman? I'd already tried reporting his behavior to the boarding house owner and was told I must be imagining things. So I ran, because I was terrified the law would kill me for defending myself. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He suggested she'd invited Brennan to her room, that they'd had a consensual relationship that turned violent when he refused to give her money. He pointed out that she'd waited hours before fleeing, suggesting she'd used that time to concoct her story. He questioned why, if she was truly defending herself, she hadn't stayed to report it to the authorities. Because I knew what would happen, Lila said, her voice rising. I knew you'd do exactly what you're doing now. Call me a liar, a seductress, a murderer. You've already decided I'm guilty because he was important and I'm nobody. That's why I ran. Not because I was guilty of murder, but because I knew the law wouldn't care about the truth. That's quite a speech, Miss Carter. Very rehearsed. It's not rehearsed, it's lived. Every word of it. The courtroom buzzed with reaction. The judge gavelled for order. Harrison pressed harder, trying to rattle her, but Lila had faced down blizzards and bullets and the threat of hanging. A prosecutor's sneers were nothing compared to that. When she finally stepped down, exhausted and wrung out, Cole was waiting in the hallway. He pulled her into his arms without a word, and she buried her face against his chest, finally allowing herself to shake. You were incredible, he murmured into her hair. So strong, so brave. I don't feel brave, I feel terrified. Brave isn't not being scared, it's being scared and doing it anyway. You just told your truth to a room full of people who wanted to condemn you. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of Lila pacing their rented room, unable to eat or sleep, imagining every possible outcome. Cole stayed with her, his presence the only thing keeping her from flying apart. They didn't talk about what would happen if the verdict went against her. There was nothing left to say. They'd fight it however they could, face whatever came together. On the afternoon of the second day, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. They filed back into the sweltering courtroom, Lila's heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and calloused hands. A working man, maybe someone who understood what it meant to be powerless against wealth and position. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find? We find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Lila's knees gave out and Cole caught her, his arms steel bands keeping her upright. Not guilty. Not guilty. The words echoed in her head like church bells, impossible and true. On the lesser charge of manslaughter, how do you find? Lila's heart stopped. There was a lesser charge? We find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of justifiable homicide in self-defense, we find for the defendant. It is our determination that Miss Carter acted in legitimate defense of her person against an unlawful assault. The judge banged his gavel, trying to restore order, but Lila couldn't hear anything over the roaring in her ears. Justifiable homicide. Self-defense. Not guilty. Free. She turned in Cole's arms, saw tears streaming down his face matching her own. He kissed her there in front of the entire courtroom, and she didn't care who saw, didn't care about propriety or scandal. She was free. Chen pushed through the crowd to shake her hand, his young face split with an enormous grin. You did it! You made them hear you! We did it, Lila corrected. All of us together. Marshal Hawkins appeared, looking satisfied. Justice isn't always blind, Miss Carter. Sometimes she actually sees what's right in front of her. The aftermath was a blur. Paperwork to sign, statements to give, journalists clamoring for interviews that Lila refused. All she wanted was to leave this city, leave the memories and ghosts behind, return to Wyoming and the life they'd begun to build. But first, there was something she needed to do. The 3 women who'd testified waited outside the courthouse, separate from the crowd, their faces uncertain. Lila approached them, her throat tight with gratitude and shared pain. Thank you, she said simply. You saved my life by speaking your truth. The laundress, whose name was Martha, took Lila's hands. You gave us courage, showed us that fighting back is possible, that we don't have to accept being victims. What will you do now? Lila asked. Live, Martha said simply. Same as you. Live without fear for the first time in years. They embraced, these four women bound by trauma and triumph, and Lila felt something shift inside her. This was why she'd come back. Not just to save herself, but to prove that men like Brennan couldn't silence women forever. That speaking truth to power mattered, even when the cost was high. Especially when the cost was high. Cole and Lila left St. Louis 3 days later, their wagon pointed west toward Wyoming and home. The city fell away behind them with every mile, its grip loosening until Lila could finally breathe without tasting smoke and sorrow. They traveled slower on the return journey, no longer racing against time or fear. They stopped to admire views, to sleep under stars, to simply exist without the weight of the trial hanging over them. Cole's shoulder had healed well, though it still ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of the day he'd stepped between Lila and a bullet. "Does it hurt?" she asked one evening as they camped beside a creek, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. "Sometimes. But it's worth it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every scar I carry is worth it if it means you're here beside me." "We're really free," Lila said, still hardly believing it. "No more running, no more hiding, just life." "Just life," Cole agreed. "What do you want to do with it?" Lila was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I want to go home, back to the ranch. I want to plant a bigger garden, raise chickens, maybe get a milk cow. I want to wake up every morning knowing I'm safe, that I belong there." "That all?" She smiled, turning to face him. "I want to marry you. Proper legal marriage, not just common law. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours." Cole's expression went soft. "Lila Carter, are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am. Is that improper?" "I don't give a damn about proper." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. I'll marry you the minute we get back to Clearwater." They reached Wyoming in late August, when the high country aspens were just beginning to turn gold. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a benediction, the cabin, the barn, the mountains rising behind it all. Home. Mrs. Patterson had been keeping an eye on the place in their absence, feeding the chickens and ensuring nothing fell into disrepair. She met them at the door with flour on her hands and a knowing smile. "Well now, I heard through the telegraph that you had quite the adventure in St. Louis, Miss Carter. Or should I say, Mrs. Barrett?" "Not yet," Lila laughed, "but soon." "Good. That man's been alone too long. About time he had someone to fight for." Mrs. Patterson wiped her hands on her apron. "I've got a pot roast in the oven and fresh bread cooling. Figured you'd be hungry from your travels. You two get settled and come eat." They married a week later in Clearwater's small church, with Marshall Hawkins standing as Cole's best man and Mrs. Patterson as Lila's witness. It was simple and perfect. No grand ceremony, no fancy dress, just two people promising to face life together, for better or worse, until death parted them. "I face death with you," Cole said during his vows, his voice rough with emotion. "Now I want to face life. All the boring, beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a lifetime. I want to wake beside you when we're gray and creaky. I want to argue about whose turn it is to feed the chickens. I want to build something lasting with you, Lila. Not just a ranch, but a legacy, a family, a home." Lila's vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. "You taught me that running doesn't make you safe. It just makes you alone. You taught me to stand and fight, to believe my life was worth defending. You gave me a reason to stop hiding and start living. I promise to face every tomorrow with the same courage you've shown me, to build our home together, to love you through every season, every hardship, every joy." They kissed as the sun streamed through the church windows, and Lila felt the last chains of her past finally fall away. She was no longer the frightened seamstress fleeing St. Louis, no longer the fugitive hiding in a remote cabin. She was Lila Barrett now, wife and partner and survivor, with a future stretching ahead full of possibility. The years that followed were everything they dreamed of and nothing like they'd imagined. The ranch prospered. They expanded the herd, improved the cabin, built a proper barn. Lila's garden became legendary in the territory, producing vegetables even in the harsh climate. They adopted 2 children whose parents had died in a wagon accident, giving them the home and love they'd lost. Cole's prediction about arguing over chicken duties proved accurate, though those arguments always ended in laughter and reconciliation. They fought, as all couples do, but they'd learned how to fight fair. No running, no hiding, just honest words and a commitment to work through whatever came. On their 5th anniversary, sitting on the porch they'd expanded to wrap around the whole cabin, Lila watched the sunset paint the mountains and felt profound gratitude for the chain of choices that had led her here. Every terrifying decision, every moment of courage, every time she'd chosen to stand instead of run. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how close I came to missing all of this. If I'd stayed running, if I hadn't come back to face the trial, if you hadn't believed in me. But you did. You came back. You stood up for yourself. You won." "We won," Lila corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not, but you could have. That's what I learned about you. When pushed to the wall, you're the strongest person I know." Their adopted daughter, Emma, named for the wife Cole had lost, called from inside the cabin. "Mama! Papa! Supper's ready, and James is trying to steal biscuits." They rose together, hand in hand, and headed inside to their life, messy and loud and beautiful. The frontier had tried to break them both, had tested them in ways neither could have imagined. But they'd survived, more than survived. They'd found each other, built something real and lasting. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Lila stood at the window of the bedroom she shared with Cole, looking out at the star-scattered sky. She thought about the woman she'd been, terrified and alone, running from a past that seemed inescapable. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Come to bed," Cole murmured sleepily. Lila turned from the window, from the ghosts and memories, and climbed into bed beside her husband. His arms came around her, warm and solid and real. This was home. This was safety. This was the future she'd fought for and won. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, carrying stories of survival and courage across the vast wilderness. Stories of women who refused to be victims, of men who chose honor over easy prejudice, of justice that sometimes, just sometimes, actually prevailed. And in a small cabin on the frontier, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness slept peacefully, their hands joined even in sleep, their future spread before them like an unwritten page. Free. Together. Home. The story that had begun with blood and fear on a boarding house floor ended here, in this moment of perfect peace. Lila had stopped running not because the danger had passed, but because she'd found something worth standing for, someone worth fighting beside, a life worth claiming as her own. The frontier had demanded everything from her courage, her strength, her willingness to believe in justice when every instinct screamed that justice was a lie told to comfortable people. But she'd met those demands and emerged not broken, but forged into something stronger. In the morning, there would be chickens to feed and fences to mend and 100 small tasks that made up a life. There would be laughter and arguments and the sweet ordinariness of days stretching into years. There would be challenges. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving, still testing everyone who dared to claim it. But Lila wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced the worst the world could throw at her and survived. She'd stood in a courtroom and demanded to be heard. She'd chosen love over fear, standing over running, truth over silence. And she'd won, not just her freedom, though that was precious. Not just her life, though she'd fought hard for it. She'd won something more valuable, the knowledge that she was strong enough to face whatever came, that she deserved the life she'd built, that her past, however painful, didn't define her future. As sleep finally claimed her, Lila's last thought was one of pure gratitude. Gratitude for the blizzard that had stripped away her defenses and shown her Cole's gentle strength. Gratitude for Marshall Hawkins and his belief in actual justice. Gratitude for the women who'd stood with her in that courtroom, speaking truth that everyone had tried to silence. But most of all, gratitude for the moment on that frozen Wyoming porch when Cole had kissed her and she'd chosen to stop running long enough to feel. To hope. To believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be loved. She'd been right to believe. The future she'd barely dared to imagine had become real, messy and imperfect and more beautiful than any dream. And every morning when she woke beside Cole, when she heard her children's voices calling for breakfast, when she stepped onto the porch and saw the mountains standing eternal against the sky. Lila knew with absolute certainty she was finally, completely home.